The woman who knocked on Xavier Foster's ranch door on that scorching July afternoon in 1882 looked like she had walked through hell itself to get there. Her dress was torn at the hem, covered in dust from the Wyoming territory, and her face bore the kind of exhaustion that came from days without proper rest or food. Xavier had been mending a fence post near the house when he heard the tentative knock, so faint he almost missed it over the sound of the wind sweeping across his property outside Rock Springs. When he opened the door, she nearly collapsed against the frame. He caught her elbow instinctively, steadying her before she could fall. Her eyes, despite their weariness, held a fierce determination that struck him immediately. They were the color of honey in sunlight, and they looked straight into his own dark brown ones without flinching. "I am sorry to bother you, sir," she said, her voice hoarse and cracking. "I saw your ranch from the road. I have been traveling for 3 weeks and I need work, any work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend animals. I learn quickly if there is something I do not know." Xavier was 26 years old and had been running his ranch alone for the past 2 years since his father passed. He had built it up from nearly nothing after the old man died, working dawn to dusk every single day. He had thought about hiring help before, but ranch hands were expensive and often unreliable. Still, something about this woman's directness and the obvious courage it took for her to travel alone and ask for work from a stranger made him hesitate before sending her away. "What is your name?" he asked, still holding her elbow to keep her upright. "Fiona Sullivan," she answered. "I am from Missouri originally. I came west with my aunt and uncle 6 months ago, but they died of fever in the spring. I have been trying to find work ever since, but most places will not hire a woman alone, especially one without references." "How old are you?" 22 this past April." Xavier studied her face, noting the honest exhaustion there, the sunburn on her cheeks and the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Whatever her story was, she was clearly in desperate need of help. He made a decision that surprised even himself. "Come inside," he said, pulling the door wider. "You need water and food first, then we can talk about work." Fiona's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment he saw relief flood her features so completely that it transformed her tired face into something quite beautiful. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." He led her into the main room of his ranch house, a simple but sturdy structure he had helped his father build when he was 16. The house had 4 rooms total, a main living area with a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a small washroom he had added just last year. It was not fancy, but it was clean and well-maintained. Fiona sat carefully in the chair he offered, as if afraid she might break it or somehow offend him by sitting too comfortably. Xavier pumped fresh water from the indoor pump, another luxury he had installed himself, and brought her a full glass. She drank it so quickly he immediately refilled it. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning. I had some bread I bought in town." Xavier moved to his kitchen area and began preparing food. He was no great cook, but he could manage the basics. He sliced bread, brought out some cold chicken he had roasted the night before, and found cheese and butter in his icebox. He placed it all in front of her and watched as she stared at the food with an expression that made his chest tighten. She looked like she wanted to devour it all immediately, but was forcing herself to be polite. "Eat," he said simply. "Take your time, but eat as much as you need." She did, and he could see her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the bread. Xavier turned away to give her some privacy, busying himself with stoking the fire in the stove even though it did not really need it. The July heat was already making the house warm, but he needed something to do with his hands while she ate. When he finally turned back around, Fiona had finished most of the food and was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, looking more alive than when she had first arrived. Color had returned to her cheeks, and though she still looked exhausted, the immediate desperation had faded from her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Foster," she said quietly. "I cannot tell you how much this means to me." "How did you know my name?" he asked, genuinely curious. "The man at the general store in Rock Springs. I asked if there were any ranches nearby that might need help. He said yours was the closest, but that you probably would not hire a woman. He said your name was Xavier Foster and that you kept to yourself mostly." Xavier could imagine old George at the general store saying exactly that. The man knew everyone's business and was not shy about sharing it. "He was probably right that I would not normally hire a woman for ranch work," Xavier admitted. "But I do need help and you seem capable enough. The question is whether you can handle the work. It is not easy." "I can handle it," Fiona said immediately, sitting up straighter. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I know how to work hard. My father taught me before he died when I was 15. After that, it was just my mother and me until she passed 2 years ago. That is when I went to live with my aunt and uncle." "What kind of work did you do on the farm?" "Everything. We had chickens, pigs, 2 cows, and a vegetable garden. I could milk, slaughter when needed, plant and harvest, preserve food. My mother was not strong, so I did most of the heavy work from the time I was 16 onward." Xavier nodded slowly. If even half of what she said was true, she would be more useful than he had initially thought. "The work here is similar but on a larger scale. I run cattle mainly, about 200 head right now. I also have horses, chickens, and a large vegetable garden that I have been neglecting because I do not have time to maintain it properly. I need help with everything from cooking and cleaning to mending fences and tending the animals. Can you ride a horse?" "Yes, sir. Not fancy, but I can ride well enough." "Can you shoot?" Fiona hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "My father taught me." "I am better with a rifle than a pistol." "Good. You will need to know how to protect yourself out here. We do not get much trouble, but it is Wyoming territory and things can happen. Bandits sometimes come through and there are wild animals, wolves especially in the winter." "I understand." Xavier walked to the window and looked out at his land, thinking through the logistics. He had been managing alone, but it had been wearing him down. Having help would make an enormous difference, but having a single woman living on his property would raise eyebrows in town. People would talk, and in a small community like Rock Springs, talk could damage reputations quickly. "If you stay here and work for me, people in town will gossip," he said, turning back to face her. "A single man and a single woman living under the same roof, they will assume things whether they are true or not." Fiona's expression hardened slightly. "I know. It has been that way everywhere I have tried to find work, but Mr. Foster, I am desperate. I have almost no money left, nowhere to go, and winter will come eventually. I need this work, and I will do it well. I do not care what people say as long as I have a roof over my head and food to eat. You have my word that I will work hard and cause you no trouble." There was something in her voice, a steel core beneath the exhaustion, that made Xavier believe her. She had survived losing her parents, traveling west, losing her aunt and uncle, and wandering alone looking for work. She was tougher than she looked. "All right," he said, making his decision. "You can stay. I will pay you $30 a month plus room and board. You can have the second bedroom. I will expect you to help with everything around here, from cooking to ranch work. We will start early, usually before dawn, and work until the day's tasks are done. Sunday afternoons are for rest. Does that sound fair?" Fiona stood up so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. "More than fair. Thank you, Mr. Foster. I promise you will not regret this." Xavier extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. Her hand was smaller than his, worn rough with calluses that proved she was not lying about knowing hard work. "Call me Xavier," he said. "If we are going to be working together every day, we might as well be less formal. Then you should call me Fiona." "All right, Fiona. Let me show you to your room. You should rest today and tonight. We will start fresh tomorrow morning." He led her to the second bedroom, a simple space with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains in the distance. It had been his father's room, but Xavier had not been able to bring himself to use it after the old man died. He had cleaned it out months ago, donating most of his father's belongings to the church in town, but he had kept the furniture. "This is yours now," he said. "There are clean linens in the dresser. The washroom is next door. Take whatever time you need to settle in." Fiona walked into the room slowly, running her hand along the edge of the dresser as if she could not quite believe it was real. "I have not had my own room since my mother died," she said softly. "Thank you, Xavier, truly," he nodded, suddenly feeling awkward at the emotion in her voice. "I will leave you to rest. If you need anything, I will be outside finishing the fence work." Xavier left her there and returned to his work, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman now sleeping in his house. He had acted on impulse, something he rarely did, and he hoped it would not turn out to be a mistake. But something about Fiona Sullivan had struck a chord in him. Maybe it was the determination in her eyes, or maybe it was simply that he understood what it was like to be alone and struggling. Either way, she was here now, and he would see if she could truly do the work she claimed. The next morning, Xavier woke before dawn as usual and was surprised to find Fiona already in the kitchen when he emerged from his room. She had somehow found his supplies and was making coffee and breakfast. The smell of bacon filled the house, and he saw she had also made biscuits that were just coming out of the oven. "Good morning," she said when she saw him. "I hope you do not mind that I started breakfast. I wanted to make myself useful right away." "I do not mind at all," Xavier said, genuinely impressed. "This smells better than anything I have made in months." They ate together as the sun began to rise, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of pink and gold. Xavier explained the day's work ahead, starting with checking on the cattle in the north pasture, and then working on reinforcing the fence line that had been damaged in a recent storm. Fiona listened carefully, asking intelligent questions that showed she was paying attention. After breakfast, they headed out together. Xavier saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, and helped Fiona with a gentler mare named Daisy. He watched as she mounted with practiced ease, confirming that she had indeed learned to ride properly. They rode out across his land as the morning air was still cool, before the July heat would become oppressive. Xavier found himself explaining his plans for the ranch, something he had not done with anyone since his father died. Fiona listened and occasionally offered suggestions based on her experience from Missouri. Some of her ideas were surprisingly good, adaptations for the different climate and terrain that he had not considered. Working alongside her that first day, Xavier quickly realized she had not exaggerated her abilities. She could handle tools properly, was not afraid to get dirty, and worked with a steady determination that matched his own. When they stopped for lunch, both of them dusty and sweating from the morning's labor, he found himself more relaxed than he had been in months. "You were right," he said as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, eating the sandwiches she had prepared that morning. "You do know how to work." Fiona smiled, and he realized it was the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and lighting up those honey-colored eyes. "I told you I would not cause you trouble," she said. "Well, not about the work anyway." I cannot help what the gossips in town might say." "Let them talk," Xavier said, surprised by his own vehemence. "We know the truth, and that is what matters." As the days turned into weeks, a comfortable rhythm developed between them. Fiona proved herself again and again, tackling every task he gave her with competence and good humor. She could ride fence lines, help deliver a difficult calf, shoot a rattlesnake that got too close to the chicken coop, and still come back to cook meals that made Xavier look forward to supper time. But more than her usefulness as a ranch hand, Xavier found himself enjoying her company. Fiona was smart and well-read despite her rough circumstances. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sometimes sit on the porch and talk as the sun set. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her parents and the life she had left behind. He told her about his father, about building the ranch, and his dreams of expanding it into one of the most successful operations in Wyoming territory. He learned that she had a quick wit and a laugh that sounded like music. He discovered that she loved thunderstorms and would stand on the porch watching the lightning dance across the plains. She learned that he had a talent for woodworking and spent his rare free time carving small figures of animals. They shared a love of horses and a respect for the hard but honest work of ranching. It was sometime during the third week that Xavier realized he was falling in love with her. The realization came one evening when he was watching her tend to a mare that had cut her leg on some barbed wire. Fiona was gentle and patient, talking softly to the nervous animal while she cleaned and bandaged the wound. The setting sun caught her hair, turning it a rich auburn, and Xavier felt his heart clench in his chest. He tried to push the feelings away, telling himself it was inappropriate and that she was his employee. But the heart did not listen to logic. Every day, he found himself noticing new things about her. The way she hummed while she worked in the garden, the small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident, the fierce concentration on her face when she was aiming a rifle, the kindness she showed to the animals, the strength in her when facing difficult tasks. Xavier did not know if Fiona felt anything similar. She was friendly and warm with him, but she was also dependent on him for her livelihood and shelter. He would not abuse that position by making unwanted advances. So he kept his feelings to himself and tried to be content with her presence in his life, even if it could never be more than employer and employee. But things changed one afternoon in late August when they rode into Rock Springs together for supplies. It was the first time Fiona had accompanied him to town since she arrived, and he could see people staring as they drove the wagon down the main street. He heard whispers and saw women turning to talk behind their hands. At the general store, the owner George greeted them with raised eyebrows. "Xavier," he said slowly, "and this must be the woman you hired. Miss Sullivan, is it?" "Mrs. Sullivan," Fiona lied smoothly, and Xavier shot her a surprised glance. She ignored him and continued. "My husband died on our way west. Xavier here has been kind enough to give me work in my time of need." George's expression softened immediately. "Oh, I am sorry for your loss, Mrs. Sullivan. That is very charitable of you, Xavier." As they collected their supplies, Xavier said nothing about Fiona's lie, but once they were back in the wagon and heading out of town, he finally spoke. "Why did you say you were married?" Fiona looked straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. "Because a widow is more respectable than a single woman living with a single man. People might still gossip, but it will be less harsh. I do not care for myself, but I do not want your reputation damaged because you were kind enough to help me." Xavier felt something warm spread through his chest at her concern for him. "I told you before, I do not care what people say." "Maybe you should," Fiona said quietly. "You have to do business with these people. You might want to marry someday and bring a wife here. A bad reputation could affect all of that. "And what about you?" Xavier asked. "Do you not want to marry someday?" Fiona was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I suppose I might have wanted that once. But I am 22 with no family, no dowry, and nothing to offer a husband except hard work. Most men want more than that. I have accepted that my future is probably going to be working for wages wherever I can find it, and hoping I can save enough to support myself when I am too old to work." The resignation in her voice made Xavier's chest ache. Before he could think better of it, the words tumbled out. "That is not true. You have a great deal to offer. You are intelligent, capable, strong, and kind. Any man would be lucky to have you as his wife." Fiona turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "That is kind of you to say. I am not being kind, I am being honest." They rode in silence for a while, but Xavier could feel something shifting between them, some awareness that had not been there before. When they reached the ranch and began unloading supplies, he kept stealing glances at her, wondering what she was thinking. That night, after supper, they sat on the porch as had become their habit. The August air was finally cooling after the heat of the day, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Xavier had been gathering his courage all evening, and finally, he decided he had to speak. "Fiona," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I need to tell you something, and I want you to know that your job and your place here are secure no matter how you respond. This will not change that." She turned to look at him, concern flickering across her face. "What is it?" Xavier took a deep breath. "These past 2 months having you here have been the best I can remember in a long time. You have made this ranch run better than I ever could alone, but more than that, you have made it feel like a home instead of just a place where I work and sleep. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I enjoy every conversation we have. When you smile, it brightens my entire day." He paused, watching her expression carefully. She had gone very still, her eyes wide. "What I am trying to say, and saying poorly, is that I have fallen in love with you," Xavier continued. "I know that probably makes things complicated, and I am sorry for that, but I could not keep it to myself anymore. You should know how I feel." Fiona was silent for so long that Xavier felt his heart sink. He had made a terrible mistake. He should have kept his mouth shut. But then she smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You are not the only one whose feelings have changed," she said softly. "I have been trying not to fall in love with you because I was afraid. Afraid that you would think I was trying to manipulate you or take advantage of your kindness. Afraid that I was confusing gratitude with love. But Xavier, what I feel for you is not gratitude. It is love. Real and true and terrifying because I could lose it so easily." Xavier felt like he could not breathe properly. "You love me." "Yes," Fiona said simply. "I have for weeks now, but I did not think you could possibly feel the same way about someone like me. Someone like you." Xavier stood up and moved to crouch in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "Fiona, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. Your circumstances do not define you. Your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, your courage, those are what define you, and those are what I fell in love with." Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, but she was smiling. "I never thought I would hear anyone say such things to me." Xavier reached up to gently wipe away her tears with his thumb. "Then I will say them every day for the rest of our lives if you will let me. Fiona Sullivan, I know this is fast, and I know we have only known each other for 2 months, but I have never been more certain of anything. Will you marry me? Not because you need a job or a home, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you." Fiona's breath caught, and for a moment Xavier feared she would say no. But then she was nodding, laughing, and crying at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, "I will marry you, Xavier Foster. I love you, and I cannot imagine anything that would make me happier." Xavier pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her close as relief and joy flooded through him. She fit perfectly against him, her head tucked under his chin. He could feel her heart beating rapidly against his chest, matching his own racing pulse. When he finally pulled back enough to look at her face, he saw his own happiness reflected in her eyes. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a promise of love and commitment. Fiona's arms came up around his neck, and she kissed him back with a tenderness that made his heart ache in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I came out here asking for your hand in marriage when I should have planned something more romantic," he said. "I should have taken you somewhere beautiful, maybe up to the ridge where you can see for miles. I should have had a ring ready." Fiona laughed softly. "Xavier, you gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You treated me with respect when most people would have turned me away. You saw me for who I am, not just my circumstances. That is more romantic than any fancy proposal could ever be. And as for a ring, we can figure that out together." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future. They decided to marry quickly and quietly, partly because neither of them wanted to wait and partly to stop the gossip in town. Xavier suggested they could go to the church in Rock Springs the following week and ask the minister to perform a simple ceremony. Fiona agreed, but she had one request. "I want it to be real and legal," she said. "Not just because of what people think, but because this is real for us. I want to be your wife in every way that matters." "It will be," Xavier promised, "as real and legal as we can make it." The next week felt both impossibly long and incredibly short. They continued working the ranch together, but everything felt different now. They could touch freely, share kisses when they wanted, and talk openly about their feelings. Xavier found himself constantly amazed that this incredible woman had agreed to be his wife. He rode into town alone one day and used most of his savings to buy a simple gold band from the jeweler. It was not fancy, but it was solid and well made, and he hoped Fiona would like it. He also bought fabric for a new dress, thinking she might want something special to wear for the wedding. When he presented these things to her that evening, Fiona's eyes filled with tears again. "You did not have to do this," she said, touching the soft blue fabric gently. "I wanted to," Xavier said. "You deserve beautiful things, Fiona. I wish I could give you more." "This is more than enough," she assured him. "More than I ever dreamed of having." She spent the next few days making herself a new dress, working on it in the evenings by lamplight. Xavier would watch her sewing, marveling at her skill with a needle. She created a simple but elegant dress in a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. On the day of their wedding, they rode into Rock Springs together in the wagon. Fiona wore her new dress and Xavier had put on his best suit, the one he usually reserved for church on the rare occasions he attended. He had even shaved and trimmed his hair, wanting to look his best for her. The minister, Reverend Thompson, was an older man who had known Xavier's father. He greeted them warmly when they arrived at the small church. "Xavier, it is good to see you, and this must be your intended bride." "Yes, sir," Xavier said. "This is Fiona Sullivan. We would like you to marry us today if you are willing." Reverend Thompson studied them both with kind eyes. "This seems rather sudden. I heard you only hired Miss Sullivan a couple of months ago." "Sometimes you just know," Xavier said firmly. "I love her and she loves me. We want to be married properly and start our life together." The Reverend smiled. "Well, I have always believed in listening to the heart. If you are both certain, I would be honored to perform the ceremony. Do you have witnesses?" They had not thought of that, but the Reverend's wife and the church caretaker were both present and agreed to serve as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and short, held in the small church with afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. But to Xavier, it was perfect. When the Reverend said, "You may kiss your bride," Xavier took Fiona's face gently in his hands and kissed her with all the love in his heart. She was his wife now, truly and completely. When they signed the marriage certificate, making it legal and official, Xavier felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. They had a quiet supper at the hotel restaurant in Rock Springs to celebrate, a luxury they could barely afford, but that Xavier insisted on. Fiona had never looked more beautiful, her face glowing with happiness. Several people they knew from town stopped by their table to offer congratulations, and Xavier noticed that the gossip had already shifted. Now, instead of whispering about impropriety, people were commenting on what a lovely couple they made. When they returned to the ranch that evening as husband and wife, Xavier carried Fiona over the threshold, making her laugh with delight. "I always wanted to do that," he admitted with a grin. That night, they truly became husband and wife in every sense. Xavier was gentle and patient, wanting Fiona's first time to be filled with love and care. She responded with a trust and passion that took his breath away. Afterward, lying together in his bed that was now their bed, Xavier held her close and thanked God for the day she had knocked on his door asking for work. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." Fiona turned in his arms to face him, her eyes soft in the lamplight. "I love you too. When I walked up to this house 2 months ago, I was just hoping for a job and a place to sleep. Instead, I found a home and a husband and the kind of love I had stopped believing existed." "You saved my life, Xavier." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was just existing before you came. You made me start living again." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Xavier's life. Working the ranch with Fiona as his wife was completely different from working with her as his employee. They were partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together, building their future side by side. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. The vegetable garden that Fiona maintained provided more food than they could use, so they sold the surplus in town. The cattle herd grew healthy and strong. They even acquired a few more horses, thinking about breeding them eventually. As autumn turned to winter, they prepared the ranch for the harsh Wyoming cold together. They reinforced the barn, stocked up on supplies, and made sure everything was secure. Their first winter as a married couple was challenging, with snowstorms that sometimes lasted for days and temperatures that dropped brutally low. But inside their home, there was warmth and love. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, Fiona often mending clothes or knitting while Xavier carved his wooden figures, talking about their dreams for the ranch and their future. It was in February, in the depths of winter, that Fiona told him she was expecting a child. Xavier had been bringing in firewood when she met him at the door with tears in her eyes. His first thought was that something was wrong and his heart had clenched with fear. "What is it?" he asked urgently, dropping the wood and reaching for her. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said, laughing through her tears. "Better than fine. Xavier, I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." Xavier felt his knees go weak with relief and joy. He pulled her into his arms carefully, suddenly terrified that he might hurt her somehow. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I have been fairly certain for a few weeks, but I wanted to be sure before I told you. The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday when you thought I was just buying supplies. The baby should come in early September." Xavier could not speak for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. He was going to be a father. Fiona was going to have his child. They were going to be a family. "I love you," he finally managed to say. "I love you so much, and I am going to love our baby just as much." "I know you will," Fiona said, smiling up at him. "You are going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was not easy. Fiona suffered from morning sickness through most of the spring, and Xavier worried constantly about her. He tried to take on more of the heavy work, but Fiona was stubborn and insisted on continuing to help as much as she could. They compromised, with Fiona focusing on tasks that did not require heavy lifting while Xavier handled the more strenuous ranch work. As summer arrived, and Fiona's belly grew round with their child, Xavier found himself constantly amazed by her strength. She still helped with the garden, the chickens, the cooking, and countless other tasks, all while carrying their baby. He would watch her sometimes, seeing her rest a hand on her belly with a soft smile on her face, and feel such a surge of love that it nearly brought him to his knees. They prepared for the baby's arrival together, turning the small room that had been used for storage into a nursery. Xavier built a beautiful cradle out of oak, carving it with intricate designs of horses and flowers. Fiona sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her face glowing with anticipation. In early September, just as the doctor had predicted, Fiona went into labor. Xavier rode into town at dangerous speed to fetch the doctor and the midwife who assisted with births in the area. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Xavier paced outside the bedroom door, terrified and helpless, listening to Fiona's cries and praying for her safety. Finally, just as the sun was rising over the Wyoming plains, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. The midwife opened the door with a smile on her weathered face. "You can come in now, Mr. Foster. You have a son." Xavier walked into the room on shaking legs. Fiona was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. Xavier approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Come meet your son," Fiona said softly, her voice tired but full of joy. Xavier sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving one impossibly small fist in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Xavier had ever seen, except for the woman holding him. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Are you all right? Was it very terrible?" "I am fine," Fiona assured him. "Tired but fine. And yes, it was difficult, but look at him, Xavier. He was worth every moment." Xavier gently touched his son's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers immediately curled around his thumb with surprising strength. The sensation of that small hand gripping his thumb sent a wave of fierce, protective love through Xavier that was almost overwhelming. He would do anything for this child. He would protect him, provide for him, and teach him everything he knew. "What should we name him?" Fiona asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never quite decided. Looking at his son now, Xavier thought of his father, the man who had taught him everything about ranching and hard work and integrity. "What about James?" he suggested. "After my father, James Foster." Fiona smiled. "James Foster, I love it. Hello, little James. Welcome to the world." The weeks after James's birth were challenging but wonderful. The baby was healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs that he was not afraid to use. Fiona recovered quickly from the birth, though Xavier insisted she take it easy for a while. He took on even more of the ranch work, hiring a young man from town to help during the busiest times so Fiona could focus on caring for James. Xavier discovered that fatherhood suited him. He loved everything about his son, from the way the baby would grip his finger to the small sounds he made while sleeping. He would watch Fiona nursing James and feel such overwhelming gratitude for his family that he sometimes had to step outside to compose himself. As James grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Xavier expanded their cattle herd and invested in better breeding stock. They built an addition onto the house, adding another bedroom and a larger kitchen. Fiona started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods in town, which brought in extra income and helped establish them even more firmly in the Rock Springs community. When James was 2 years old, Fiona became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1886 they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Sarah, after Fiona's mother. Sarah had her mother's honey-colored eyes and was a calm, sweet baby who rarely cried. Their life fell into a happy rhythm. The ranch kept them busy, but provided a good living. James grew into a curious, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing an interest in the horses and cattle. Sarah was a gentle soul who loved helping her mother in the garden and learning to cook. Years passed in a blur of hard work, love, and growth. They faced challenges, like the severe drought of 1889 that tested every rancher in Wyoming, and the harsh winter of 1891 that killed some of their cattle. But they faced everything together, and their love only grew deeper. Xavier watched Fiona grow from the desperate young woman who had knocked on his door into a confident, capable ranch wife and mother. She was respected in town, known for her kindness and her excellent cooking. The women who had once gossiped about her now sought her friendship. She was happy, truly happy, and knowing that he had played a part in that happiness filled Xavier with profound satisfaction. Fiona, for her part, marveled daily at the life she had built with Xavier. She had gone from having nothing and no one to having a home, a husband who adored her, beautiful children, and a place in the community. The ranch that had started as just a place asking for work had become her entire world in the best possible way. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1892, Xavier surprised Fiona by taking her back to the church in Rock Springs where they had married. The children stayed with a neighbor for the evening. They had dinner at the same hotel restaurant where they had celebrated their wedding night, and then Xavier walked her to the church. "Why are we here?" Fiona asked, confused but smiling. "I wanted to stand in the place where we made our vows," Xavier said, "and tell you again how much I love you and how grateful I am that you knocked on my door that day asking for work." Fiona's eyes filled with tears, as they still did when Xavier said something particularly romantic. "I am the grateful one. You gave me everything, Xavier. A home, a family, love, a purpose. You saved me." Xavier took both her hands in his. "You saved me right back. I was just going through the motions before you came. You brought life and love and laughter into my world. These 10 years with you have been the best of my life. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more still tomorrow and every day after that." "I love you too," Fiona said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Forever and always." They stood there in the evening light, holding each other in the place where they had begun their married life, both grateful beyond words for the love they had found and the life they had built together. As they walked back to their wagon to return home to their children and their ranch, Xavier thought about how a single moment of compassion had changed both their lives. He had opened his door to a desperate woman asking for work, and in return, she had given him a home in the truest sense of the word. Not just a house or a place, but a feeling of belonging and love that made every day worthwhile. The years continued to pass. James grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Sarah became a talented cook and seamstress like her mother, but also developed a surprising skill with horses. In 1895, Fiona surprised everyone by having another baby at the age of 35, another son they named Thomas. Xavier and Fiona grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies showing the effects of years of hard work. But their love remained young and vibrant. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when weather permitted, still talked about their dreams and plans, still held hands and shared kisses like newlyweds. The ranch continued to thrive and grow under their combined efforts. By 1900, it was one of the most successful operations in the Rock Springs area. James had taken on more and more responsibility, showing the same work ethic and integrity his father had taught him. Sarah had married a good man from a neighboring ranch, and they visited often with their own children, Xavier and Fiona's grandchildren. On a warm summer evening in 1902, 20 years after the day Fiona had first knocked on his door, Xavier and Fiona sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their youngest son Thomas was playing in the yard, chasing fireflies. The sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the nickering of horses, the chickens settling in for the night created a peaceful backdrop. "You ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Fiona asked, her head resting on Xavier's shoulder. "What if I had walked past your ranch that day? What if you had turned me away?" "I try not to think about it," Xavier admitted. "The idea of a life without you and our children is too terrible to contemplate. I thank God every day that you had the courage to knock on my door and ask for work. And I thank God every day that you had the compassion to give me a chance," Fiona said. "You asked for my hand instead of just my labor. You saw me as a person worth loving, not just a worker." That made all the difference. Xavier pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You were always worth loving. I just had the good fortune to see it early." Thomas came running up to the porch, his small hands cupped carefully around a firefly. "Look, Papa, look, Mama, I caught one." They admired his catch and helped him release it gently back into the evening air. As Thomas ran off to catch another one, Xavier watched Fiona's face, seeing the love and contentment there. She caught him looking and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how blessed I am," Xavier said honestly. "About how much I love you and our family, about how grateful I am for every day we have together." "That is what I am thinking about too," Fiona said softly. They sat there together as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them on their wedding night 20 years ago. The ranch that had once been Xavier's solitary domain was now a true home, filled with love and laughter and life. The woman who had knocked on his door as a desperate stranger seeking work had become his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, and the love of his life. And Xavier knew, with absolute certainty, that opening that door and asking for her hand instead of just offering her work was the best decision he had ever made. Their love story, which had begun with a simple knock and a request for work, had grown into something beautiful and enduring that would last all their days and beyond. As the years continued to pass, Xavier and Fiona faced the inevitable challenges that came with age and changing times. The new century brought changes to Wyoming, with more people settling the territory, and eventually Wyoming achieving full statehood in 1890. Technology slowly crept into even remote areas like Rock Springs, with telephone lines and better roads connecting previously isolated ranches. Through it all, Xavier and Fiona adapted while holding tight to the values and love that had sustained them from the beginning. They taught their children the importance of hard work, integrity, and treating everyone with respect regardless of their circumstances. They never forgot where they had come from, Fiona's desperate beginnings and Xavier's lonely existence, and they raised their children to appreciate the blessings they had. James eventually took over the main running of the ranch, though Xavier remained involved and active for many years. Sarah's children would visit often, filling the house with energy and laughter. Thomas showed an aptitude for learning and eventually went to study agriculture at the new university, with plans to bring modern farming techniques back to improve the ranch even further. Xavier and Fiona became beloved figures in Rock Springs, known for their generosity and kindness. They helped other newcomers to the area, remembering how difficult it had been for Fiona when she first arrived. Their home became known as a place where someone in need could find a meal and assistance, no questions asked. In the autumn of 1910, as Xavier approached his 54th birthday and Fiona her 46th, they celebrated the birth of their first great-grandchild, Sarah's daughter's baby. Holding the tiny infant, Xavier marveled at how far they had come from that hot July day in 1882 when a desperate woman had knocked on his door. "Look at what we built," Fiona said softly, watching him hold the baby. "Not just the ranch, but this entire family. All these people who exist because you were kind to a stranger." "Because we loved each other," Xavier corrected. "Everything good in my life came from that love." As the years advanced into their 60s and then 70s, Xavier and Fiona slowed down but never stopped. They still took their evening walks when weather permitted, still sat on the porch watching sunsets, still held hands and shared the kind of glances that spoke of decades of shared love and understanding. Their children and grandchildren would watch them sometimes and hope to find that kind of enduring love in their own lives. Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925, at the age of 69, with Fiona holding his hand. His last words to her were the same he had said countless times over their 43 years of marriage. "I love you." Fiona, though heartbroken, took comfort in knowing he had lived a full and happy life, surrounded by love until the very end. Fiona lived for another 7 years, spending her time with her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She would often sit on the porch of the ranch house, the same porch where she and Xavier had shared so many evenings, and remember. She remembered knocking on that door, terrified and desperate. She remembered Xavier's kindness, the way he had seen past her circumstances to the person she was. She remembered falling in love, getting married, raising their children, building a life together. When Fiona passed away quietly in her sleep in 1932, at the age of 72, she was buried next to Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their headstone bore a simple inscription, "Together in life, together in eternity." 1882, 1932. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations of foster children who had all inherited their parents' work ethic and values. And though the world around it changed dramatically over the decades, the story of Xavier and Fiona remained a beloved family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about courage and kindness, about seeing the value in people regardless of their circumstances. It was a story about how a single act of compassion could change multiple lives. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple. A story about a woman who knocked asking for work, and a man who gave her a home and asked for her hand instead. And how that simple exchange of kindness and courage created a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would walk the land that Xavier and Fiona had worked together, would live in the house they had expanded and improved, would see the trees they had planted and the legacy they had created. And they would remember that it all started with love, with two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to build something beautiful together. The story of Xavier Foster and Fiona Sullivan became more than just a family history. It became a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places and circumstances. That sometimes the greatest blessings came from simply opening your door and your heart to someone in need. That the best decisions in life were often made by following your heart rather than convention or expectation. As the decades passed and the 20th century marched on, the ranch that had witnessed their love story continued to stand as a testament to what they had built together. Not just the physical structures of barns and fences and houses, but the legacy of love, family, and compassion that started on that hot July day in 1882, when a desperate woman knocked on a door and a lonely man answered, giving her not just work, but a home, a family, and a love that would endure through the ages.